Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I posted on X a couple of days ago that I am going to learn to fly. Actually, decades. I've been waiting for decades to do this, and I finally have a combination of basically enough money, although it's very expensive to get a flight certification. But anyway, I have a combination of that plus a little bit of time this summer to be able to actually put in some hours doing flight training. And of course, since I've been thinking about this for basically forever, I have a lot of interest in the physics of flying in addition to just the actual fact of doing it and everything. And I thought, why not take you all along for a ride with me up in the air, maybe? Once I get pilot certified, if you want to come visit, I can take you up in the air for real. But anyway, I want to start a series on learning to fly. And I thought the very first thing we should do is we should talk about the physics of lift. I will do another follow-up video after this on the physics of drag, making this more complicated. But the first thing I wanted to do was just basically show lift. I wanted to be like, okay, let's make this as simple as possible. And we can demonstrate how lift actually works using a fluid simulator. This is me and Claude from Anthropic. We have put this thing together. It took quite a while. I actually tried Grok and ChatGPT. They didn't work very well at all, but Claude just kind of got it. It understood exactly what I wanted. So a bunch of iterations to get this to work, but basically we're just doing a simple lift demo here, and I've got it paused at the moment. As you can see, this is a more or less traditional airfoil shape. It's a NACA 4 airfoil shape, more or less. So NACA actually stood for the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. This was previous to NASA. It actually became NASA when it was converted over in the late 50s. But anyway, this airfoil shape was made, back in the day. They figured this stuff out on slide rules and in wind tunnels, basically. And to this day, we use evolutions of that for, an airplane. If you ever look at the side-on, view of an airplane, this is obviously a 2D cross-section of that airfoil. Obviously, the airplane wing itself is big. It has a length to it. It's three-dimensional. Three-dimensional airflow is much more complicated. We're just going to do a simplified version of that right now. And this green arrow here is the force vector. It's what gives lift and also drag. You'll notice that it is pointing slightly backwards at this point. The part that is straight up like this is the lift. The part that goes backwards is drag. There's only really four forces that affect an airplane, and that is lift and gravity or weight. So that's lift pushes it upward, gravity forces it downward. Then you have thrust, and that's the propeller or the jet engine that's pushing it forward through the air. And then you have drag, which is the force that's pushing it backwards. At the most simple level, that's what that is. What we're going to do is use a wind tunnel basically for this thing. So you imagine this is sitting on a stick in a wind tunnel, and we've got these little green arrows that are coming in here. I can push play for a second. So these green arrows are coming in towards the airfoil, and they're nicely arranged in lines here. So they're all kind of flowing in a laminar sort of way. And then we'll get to the airfoil and will interact with that. And we'll see a bunch of different, features here. The first thing I want to do is show you that you don't actually need this airfoil shape to provide lift. So this would be a flat plane, like basically a paper airplane, or just even like a wing like that, just something like that, just a flat plane, or your hand outside of the window. Everybody has done this, right? You've ridden in a car and it's driving like 50 miles an hour. You put your hand out the window, you tip it up like this, and all of a sudden your hand goes up, tip it down, hand goes down, tip it up, hand goes up, right? So this is what we're talking about here. Look at this. This works just fine. It would be perfectly adequate for a paper airplane or something, but notice that the force vector, this green arrow, when I go to an airfoil shape, much bigger, much smaller, much bigger. So the whole reason why we have an airfoil shape is just for efficiency's sake. It's a more efficient wing. You can make something fly with just a flat plane. So it will actually work. And so that's the number one thing that we need to look at here. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just show how even with a flat plane that you will actually get lift, and you'll watch the air molecules sort of separate around this flow. And the red here is the air molecules slowing down as they go under the wing. And over the top, you've got kind of a laminar flow that just kind of hugs the top of that wing. So most of the lift, and most people talk about this differently, but I'm going to pause this again. But most of the lift actually honestly comes from the bottom of the wing. You can imagine it as tiny, tiny little billiard balls, little bitty billiard balls that are all being shot at this wing, and they're hitting the bottom of the wing. And as they do that, they slow down, right? Which is why they're turning red here. They slow down, and that transfers a tiny amount of momentum to the wing and thereby to the aircraft as well. So that's the primary force of lift here. The top of it is just basically because of the angle of the wing, in this case just a flat plane. You've got air that flows over the top of it at a higher speed. Of course, with Bernoulli's principle, that means the higher the velocity, the lower the pressure. So the static air pressure, so remember there's air pressure every which direction, right? There's air pressure on me from the front, from the top, from the bottom, everywhere everywhere. There's 15 psi or 1 bar. That pressure is acting on my body in all directions. If like the top of the room suddenly became a vacuum, I would just fly to the top of the room because I would have 15 psi or 1 bar of pressure forcing my body upwards. That's all that lift is. It's just basically changing the amount of pressure that's around you. So in other words, this wouldn't work in space. If you don't have any molecules of air, then you can't generate lift, which is why you have to have thrusters and things like that when you're flying in space. But basically thrust is just a differential between the top pressure and the bottom pressure. And then of course, all of the rest of that is the details. It's how do you execute that in the most efficient way with the highest amount of lift, the least amount of drag, all of that kind of stuff. That's where all the details come in, and that's where things get really, really gnarly and complicated. But at the most basic level, you're just looking at anything that's sort of inclined into an airflow. So if you're pulling it with a propeller or you're pushing air into it, either way. So like I said, if you're driving in a car and you put your hand out the window and you do like this, it's going to go up because there's a force here. There's a higher force here because you've got more air molecules hitting it here than you do over the top. The top has a lower pressure because the velocity is higher. You're not slowing down the air molecules. The velocity is higher by Bernoulli's principle. That equals lower pressure than the bottom part of the wing. The differential between those two causes it to lift. And the fact that that arrow is tipped backwards a little bit means that you're also generating drag. So the vertical component, like the straight up and down, is the lift, and the horizontal component is the drag. So we're going to get into drag in the next chat, but for this first one, I just wanted to talk about lift. So anyway, you can see how, ultimately simple this is. So I'm going to go back and restart the animation here. And I also want to show the equal transit, how that is incorrect. So we're going to go ahead and start this. I'm going to hit E for equal transit. So now what you're going to see is that the falsity of the equal transit rule. So let's go ahead and play this into this a little way. So I've got different colors so you can see this. We're going to get to these bars here. You can see that this is actually taxing the computer a bit to do this. All right, so here we have the falsity of the equal transit rule. And the equal transit rule, for those who might have heard about this, is that lift is caused by the fact that the air molecule is striking the front of the wing. So you have one molecule here and one here, and they have to go over the wing at the same time, and they reach the back at the same time. And therefore the top part has to travel faster because you can see that the top part of the wing has more of an arc to it than the bottom part of the wing. And because it has to travel faster, that causes the lift. That's not really it. You can directly see here that this red, the sort of red column here, these started at the same place, but the bottom part of the red here is actually slower than the top part. You can see that here where they're disconnected. You can see it here in the green one. You can see it in the blue one. So you can see that each column of air as it strikes the wing and goes past it, the one on the top just goes further than the one on the bottom in the same amount of time. So equal transit is not the reason for lift. It's basically that these bottom air molecules slow down. That increases the pressure on the bottom. The top air molecules ideally do not slow down. Now, when we get to turbulence and stuff like that, yes, they do start to slow down and they become disconnected from the wing and all sorts of other bad things. And that actually causes lift to disintegrate, which is like a stall sort of situation. And we're going to simulate that in just a second. But anyway, lift is just generated by the fact that there's more hydrostatic pressure on the bottom of the wing than there is on the top. And yes, air is a fluid. It's a compressible fluid, which makes it really, really complicated. Much easier to model this stuff on water because water is an incompressible fluid. So you can look at wing shapes and things like that, submarines, all sorts of things like that. In water, it's actually easier to model that than it is to model air because air is compressible and it can actually change speed and the air molecules can get closer and further away from each other and things like that. But anyway, so equal transit doesn't work. I thought that was a pretty cool little demo here. So we're going to go back and we're going to restart the demo again. And I'm going to go back to my rectangle shape and I'm going to change the angle of attack up here. And let's watch the vector here. So currently it's 5. If I reduce this down to about 0, you see the force vector gets smaller. If it's -1, it's actually pointing downward. And of course, if I have the wing shape pointing downward, I get a big negative vector. So that would force the wing downward. Not exactly what you want to have happen as you're flying. But then what I can do is I can move this into the positive, and eventually we will reach the largest force vector going upwards. But also notice that we're starting to generate vortices. That's what these pink and purple sort of circles are. So that actually is creating vortices, like spinny things coming off the back end of the wing. And that is not good because that creates a lot of friction. It also causes flow separation. You can see that we no longer have air molecules flowing across the top of this shape, which means that it has lost contact with the air, which means that we don't have like control authority anymore. A lot of bad things happen when you get flow separation off of this, and that's what these vortices are showing. So you can see here that with this wing shape, it's got a lot of lift at this point, but we're also starting to form vortices. If we move to a higher angle of attack, look how little the lift is at this point. So we've got full flow separation coming off from the top of the wing, and there's very, very, very little lift being generated anymore. In fact, if we take 1,000 kilos for the weight of our airplane, that's just arbitrary. That's about 2,200 pounds or so. If we look at this, the effective lift is now negative 719 kilos. Even though it's providing a small amount of lift, the plane will actually fall out of the sky because the wing is at too high of an angle of attack. So if we move this back to a more reasonable angle, you can see now it's still negative, but barely. And if we move it back to maybe 10 degrees or something like that, now we have positive lift. So at this angle of attack, the airplane will actually, even with just this flat wing, and of course, this is just a simulation, probably wouldn't work quite so well in real life. But even with this flat wing in this simulation, we still are getting effective lift of 1,200 kilos, lifting it up into the air, whereas at a higher angle of attack, it actually gets less and less. And the reason why is because we get flow separation off the top, and the differential in pressure between the bottom and the top doesn't work anymore because we're not getting proper laminar flow over the top. Laminar just means smooth. It just goes smoothly over the top of this. So anyway, you can also see that the force vector is starting to point more and more backwards. And so as we tip this angle more and more, we get more and more towards the back end, which is more and more drag and less lift. So that's all a negative thing. But anyway, if we reduce it down to like 9 or something like that, we get quite a bit of effective lift, even for this rectangular shape. So let's go ahead and reset the animation here. And I'm going to go ahead and kick up the angle of attack to 10. Notice how big this force vector is. We've got 2,300 kilos of effective lift. That's after, subtracting out the amount of gravity or weight of the actual aircraft itself. So we've got a lot more lift. We've got much more laminar flow. We're not producing vortices yet. And I know the simulation's not perfect, but in actual fact, you'll see the air molecules flow right over the top of the wing. So it's, again, this is a simulation. It's as good as we can get. It's already very slow. You can see that it's only running about 1 frame per second. If I tried to model it perfectly, it would run very, very slowly. This stuff is incredibly complicated. It's computational fluid dynamics. It's not rocket science, but it's not far behind. Anyway, so notice that we can tip this wing back a lot further. So we're now at 15.5 degrees angle of attack. That's a very high angle of attack, starting to get vortices that are forming, but we're still getting a lot of lift, still getting 2,200 kilos of lift. So it's actually giving it a force upwards of double the weight of the aircraft itself, but we're also getting a lot of flow separation, and we're getting vortices that are peeling off the back. And eventually I will reach what's called stall speed. So yep, there we go. So eventually if you hit an angle of attack of like 25 degrees here, there's a full flow separation. You no longer have air flowing over the top. It's just like a vacuum up there essentially. But it's also not a pure vacuum. It's actually these swirling molecules of air going around, which causes you to lose complete control because you no longer have authority with the flaps and the ailerons and things like that for this wing. And therefore you don't have control, and it's also not producing any lift. In fact, it's negative 648 kilos of lift effectively, right? So the thing's going to fall out of the sky. You won't have any authority. This is a very, very bad situation. You don't want to get into this. Obviously, what you want to do at that point is you want to lower your angle of attack back down again, even if it's just a little bit. I mean, you can see even at a completely, almost a flat angle of attack, you're still producing an effective 500 kilos of lift. And now, because you've tipped the aircraft back down again, it gains control authority. You're able to use that as well. All right, so finally, let's take a look at what flaps do. So flaps are the little things on the back of the wing here that you'll see when an aircraft takes off or lands, it tips it downward like that. So let's go ahead and turn our flaps on. So we're going to go F for flap, and notice that our flaps have now just gone down, and our effective lift has gone way, way, way up. Now, what we've traded for that is a lot more drag. So let's go ahead and kick it over. We'll turn it off and we'll turn it on. And so what happens is we've increased the lift here. You can see the vector goes up, right? So down when we don't have flaps, and up when we do have flaps. But not only have we increased the lift, but we've also increased the drag, because remember that part of this vector is facing backwards, which means that we've actually increased the lag as well. And we can also, of course, adjust our flaps angles. We can turn it down a little bit, so it's just a little bit of lift, right? So Again, notice that the effective lift, we've got 523 kilos with the flaps retracted, and we've got almost 1,700 kilos of lift with the flaps at 30 degrees. So that gives it a lot more lift. Effectively, it just makes the shape of the wing more of an arch shape, right? It just makes the air have to travel longer over the top, and it makes it hit more on the bottom. And if we increase the angle of attack, you'll be able to see this even more clearly, right? So it's causing these air molecules to pile up down here at the bottom where the flaps are, which is causing them to slow down more, which is transferring more momentum. And again, if I take away the flaps, you'll see that the lift vector gets substantially smaller, but also that we reduce the amount of drag that we have on it. So with the flaps, we've got a much bigger force vector, but also a lot more turbulence and a lot more drag. And with the flaps retracted, we've got a smaller vector, so its lifting effective lift rate is less, but that's fine when you're flying, right? Normally everything's fine like that. It's only when you land and take off because you want to do that at very, very slow speeds. And so you want that extra lift because otherwise the plane can stall out. And so let's look at that very situation. Here we have the flaps extended, and I've reduced the airspeed from 50 meters per second to about 30 meters per second. So here we're producing a teeny little bit of lift, which is just enough if you're imagining like landing or something like that. If we remove the flaps, notice that suddenly we go from an effective lift to minus 300 kilos of negative lift. So it will fall out of the sky without the flaps extended. But if we extend the flaps, we get a little bit of net positive lift, which means even at these low speeds, even as you're coming in to land and you're slowing the aircraft down, obviously you don't want to land at like 200 miles an hour. This goes, cruising into the to the runway with a Cessna or something, different if you're flying a military jet or something. In that case, you probably do want to land at that kind of speed. And by the way, it's all in knots when you're actually doing this in aviation, which is the most ridiculous thing ever. I mean, what is a knot? I think a knot is like 1.15 miles per hour or something. Anyway, it's just ridiculous. There's feet, there's knots, there's meters, there's inches of mercury, there's nautical miles. It's just the most bizarre situation. The airline industry is all over the place in terms of units, so it bothers a physicist like me. But anyway, as you can see here, at a slower airspeed, so remember we were at 50 meters per second before, but when we slow it down to 29 meters per second, like we're coming in for a landing, having the flaps extended gives us a little bit of net positive lift so that we can control the aircraft as it's coming in. If we get rid of the flaps, then suddenly we don't have that lift anymore. We're just falling out of the sky. So it's like a negative 300 kilo weight that's just falling out of the sky. That's not a good situation. So when you're coming in for a landing, or when you're taking off and again you're at slow speed because you're accelerating, you don't care about the drag so much. The drag causes a lot of inefficiency. It could cause the airframe to be stressed when you're going at high speeds. That stuff is not good for cruising. But when you're landing and taking off, you really need those flaps down so you can create that extra arch. You can create the extra barrier for the molecules at the bottom that are bouncing off of that and allow the top to flow over it. But then real quick, if we're going very, very quickly at like 73, 75 meters per second of airspeed, you can see that this thing is, of number one, we can see that these air molecules are really separated out from each other. And also that we're generating a ridiculous amount of lift. You actually don't even want that much lift. You would lose control over the aircraft if you had that much. And also, of course, you're creating a massive amount of drag on the back end. And we can also look at this even more exaggeratedly if we increase the angle of attack. And now the force vector, I mean, you're getting 8,000 kilos of effective lift. This thing's going to go rocketing up into the air. We're also going to create a massive amount of drag. All of this stuff is bad. So in that situation with very fast airflow over the vehicle, you want to reduce your effective lift. You want to actually create a smaller force vector going on this thing. So you can see that the difference in the airspeed actually makes a very, very big difference. And actually at this very fast airspeed, you want a very, very small angle of attack. So this would be cruising altitude, right? You're just zipping along and you basically have the wing shape almost flat. So you're just generating a little bit of net positive lift. And notice that the vector is almost straight up at this point. So it's not producing a lot of drag. It's not pointed backwards. It's pointed mostly straight up. So this is a very good situation. And again, if you extended your flaps at this point, you would increase your effective lift by a lot, in fact, too much, but also you would increase your drag as well. So you really want to cruise with this flight configuration instead. And just as a final note, look at this at the angle of attack of 1 degree. If we go to the straight shape, the piece of paper shape, that suddenly we're going from positive lift to negative lift. So this would actually fall out of the sky. In order to stay upright at cruising speed, you would have to go to something along those lines, like 3 degrees. That creates a lot more drag. Suddenly you can see that force vector is tipped back. So you're creating basically the same amount of lift that you had before, but you're having to tip the wing up a significant amount more. So you really want your airfoil shape to stay like this. That's going to produce the most efficient amount of lift for the amount of drag that you get at basically just a flat angle of attack. It doesn't have to be very high at all. It can just be barely positive. Alrighty, folks, so that's how an aircraft stays in the air. It just produces more pressure on the bottom of a wing, and the wing can actually include the bottom of the aircraft itself because it's a big flat body, so it can actually push up on the bottom of the aircraft itself. It doesn't even just have to be the wing. So all parts of the aircraft can actually cause lift. And as long as the pressure on the bottom of the wing is higher than the pressure on the top of the wing, the aircraft will go up. If it's lower or equal, it will either glide or it will fall down. And at the simplest level, that's what's going on. You don't need anything fancy. You just need something flat that blocks the wind and a way of getting yourself through the wind at high speed in order to create lift. Alrighty, so with that being said, today I'm going to do my first actual flight lesson. I will try to take pictures and maybe capture a quick video or something. Like I said, I'm going to start a series of these videos over the summer, which are going to go into detail about the physics of flying and also the realities of like what it takes to become a pilot. I'll try to do the best I can. Obviously, when I'm in the cockpit, I'm going to be focused on flying, so it'll probably be videos around that, but I'll see what I can do. I'll see if I can capture some stuff with a GoPro or something. Anyway, the next video on the physics of flying will get into drag, but also beyond drag, the realities, like the more complicated realities of what happens when you drive air across an airfoil with a propeller. It actually changes things a lot. So we're going to get into some more complexity here. I just wanted to start off with something that was, a reasonable demo of what goes on without getting too complex. We'll add in drag next time. We'll add in the prop wash. We'll add in the gyroscopic motion of the prop and how that affects the airplane as well. And then either in that video or another separate video, we'll get into control surfaces. I might separate it out into two videos, but control surfaces are also very important. Like, how do you actually make the airplane go where you want it to in the air? Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, please do like it so other people can find it. This is different than my normal content. Normally I talk about AI, technology, Tesla, things like that. If you enjoy that kind of content or this flying content, please do consider subscribing so you can catch the next one, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.